Hi guys, I don't like responding to Nigel Farage, but somebody has to, as the media is either cheering him on or completely asleep at the wheel. This issue of DOGE that Reform UK is pushing runs the risk of doing some serious damage. It will undermine trust in politics at the local and national level. It will see cuts to local services where instead more money is needed. It would allow Farage to sell the public the idea that he should be running the country, and it risks seeing people's personal data sold off to tech companies or used by Reform for other purposes. But in order to convince people DOGE has value, Farage needs a target, and of course, in step asylum seekers. And here he does what he does best: misrepresent reality to suit his narrative. But I want to push back.
Well, you know that DOGE is up and running. Zia Youssef is in charge of all this. Some of the things we're finding across the board of where public money is being spent is beyond comprehension. So another 450 young men crossed the English Channel yesterday. They're going to get put up in hotels or nice houses. We're going to pay for everything. Can you believe it? Wakefield District and Healthcare Partnership are now doing customer surveys of the young men living in the hotels, just to make sure that everyone's happy with what they're being given. And some of the feedback is really, really interesting. So we asked the asylum seekers, we want to know what they need from a health and well-being service, well, don't we all?
Okay, before we continue, councils will provide the Home Office with measures to help asylum seekers, for example, access health services or education services. So while the Home Office will pay for everything, the councils will generally be there to help facilitate the asylum seekers. Remember, asylum seekers are not allowed to work. The whole problem with this entire video is that Nigel Farage is pushing this idea that it's really expensive, it's a waste of money. Why are we spending all this money on these people who are just complaining? They're not allowed to work. You have to keep that in your mind the whole time. They're not allowed to work, so what can they do? They want to work. The vast majority of them would like to contribute, would like to have some money, would like to move out of ex-hotels or the type of accommodation that they're in at the moment. Surrounded by people they don't know. They would prefer to be in an area where they're with people they do know. They want to contribute, they want to have a job, they want to rebuild their lives, but they're not allowed to, because the Home Office says you're not allowed to work. So it's important to remember that point as we go forward.
Because I work, one resident said, I needed help with clothes and other things that cost money, and they work.
How can you work if you're an asylum seeker? So what sort of information is Nigel Farage providing us with? It's illegal, or it's against the rules, I should say, to work and claim asylum. You're not allowed to claim asylum. Now, there may be some exceptional circumstances, but generally, you're not allowed to work. So how can a guy who's claiming asylum say, I'm working? So there's a big problem with this report from Nigel Farage right from the very start.
Provided. Need better internet. Need a new mobile phone. Oh, and a complaint from one. Yes, a serious complaint from one in Wakefield. There were no cigarettes in the room. I mean, we surely can do better than this for these poor young men.
So if there's a problem with there's no cigarettes in the room, or if the problem is the mobile phone is not very good or the internet is not very strong or very fast, well, then the obvious solution would be to allow them to work, and then they could buy their own mobile phones. They could buy their own internet connection. They would be able to smoke in their own flat. Isn't that the solution, Nigel? No, but it seems Nigel Farage and people like Robert Jenrick are against the idea of allowing asylum seekers to work. The argument they put forward is, well, it would create a pull factor. But if you allow them to work, then you don't have to complain about them being a cost for the state.
Came in via boat. All my clothes were damaged at sea, but I've got some new clothes now. That's nice, isn't it? Another one says, I don't need anything because I've now got a credit card. We're giving them credit cards so they can...
How the hell is it possible for somebody to have a credit card? Now, there are two possibilities here. One is there's some massive loophole that we don't know about it, or Nigel Farage is lying. So which is more probable? Because generally, to get a credit card, you need to have a bank account. Now, there may be some exceptions I'm not familiar with. To have a bank account, you need to have a fixed address. You need to have bills in your name to show that you are you have a job or you have some sort of way of maintaining that bank account or that credit card. So please explain. I would love for Nigel Farage, he has a great relationship with banking. Perhaps he could explain to us how an asylum seeker who's not allowed to work is able to get a credit card. Because I'm not saying it's impossible. I would just love to know how that's possible.
Go out shopping. One says it's very difficult here because all my children and family are back in my home country. Well, why the hell did you come in the first place and leave them behind?
So this is an interesting question that's always put forward. Well, why is it young men? The young men arrive in small boats for two reasons. First of all, if it's an economic migrant, it's a young man who's coming over to find work, to improve the life of himself and his family so he can earn a few quid and send it home, or in the future return home with some money. That's one aspect, the economic migrant aspect. The other is the asylum seeker. Now, why do you see so few women and children? You do see women and children and old people in the small boats. But think about it, if you're traveling from, say, Afghanistan, how many countries and how many miles do you have to pass through in order to get to France? Thousands of miles, thousands of kilometers in very rough conditions, and maybe in the back of a truck, maybe in the boot of a car even. Older people, women and children, are not normally going to do that. So it's going to be the men who do it. In many cases, it's maybe the men who are fleeing a situation where they're being drafted into a war that they don't want to be part of. Or maybe they're being persecuted by the state. These are many different scenarios. So it's more likely you're going to see young men because they're in a stronger position physically to travel that long distance. Women and children generally are not in that state. So this is why you see that. So if somebody's arriving in the country, of course they're going to miss their friends and family back home. That's normal.
You left was such an unpleasant and dangerous place. Doesn't seem to have occurred to anybody. I mean, this poor darling, gosh, I feel so sorry for him. I do nothing all day apart from eat breakfast, smoke, have lunch, smoke, have dinner, smoke, and then go to sleep. And it goes on.
Because he doesn't want to do that. He wants to work. But he's not allowed to work. The Home Office have said you're not allowed to work. So while Nigel Farage is probably describing it as a wonderful life, you get up, you eat breakfast, you smoke, you have lunch, you smoke, you have dinner, you smoke, and you go to bed. This is not a life for this individual. He doesn't want to do that, but he has to do that because he's not allowed to work. He would prefer perhaps to have a job where he could earn some money. He could rent his own flat. He could travel around. He wouldn't be stuck in a flat or in an ex-hotel. He could actually have a better life because he wants to have a job to contribute. He wants to be able to earn some money, but he's not allowed to do that, remember.
And on and on. One is complaining and saying that he's really been put in the wrong hotel and he needs to be moved because he's got a cousin in Wakefield. So could we please move him?
Because he's surrounded by strangers. Can you imagine a situation where you're moved into an ex-hotel, you don't know anyone in there, and you're said, this is where you're going to have to be for the next number of years? Because there's a massive backlog, and we don't know when we're actually going to process your claim. So if you heard, well, we have family, I have a family member in another part of the country, can I be moved there? What's the problem with that? The person is not allowed to work. They're not allowed to move around the country. They need to ask permission to... Remember the point. He's asking, can I be moved? You know, if you're a normal citizen, you don't ask the government, can I move to another part of the country? No, you just do it because you're free. Asylum seekers are not free to do that. Nigel knows this. He's just pretending to be ignorant.
I mean, this, folks, is literally unbelievable. I've no idea how much money Wakefield locally have spent on this.
See, the councils facilitate the Home Office. So most of the spending is done by the Home Office. The council will say, look, you have somebody who needs to have access to healthcare, for example, or education or whatever. We will facilitate that. We will help you out, help the Home Office. But at the end of the day, I believe it's the Home Office that picks up the tab. But remember, because the asylum seeker is not allowed to work.
But the idea that young men illegally come to our country, get given everything, and then are given well-being surveys to see whether they're happy, just shows you the extent to which pretty much the entirety of the British establishment have lost the plot. They've lost their marbles. We don't want any of them to stay in the country at all, let alone be given all of this. I bet most of you agree.
So what's his solution? We're going to send people home. How? We don't know yet. We're going to have agreements with countries. What countries? We don't know yet. But we're going to send them all home. He's talking absolute tripe. Now, we're talking about people who are in the country. You know, a simple solution would be to allow them to work. If you allow them to work, then the cost would be minimal. Just help them access the services they need, and then they're on their own. But Reform and the Conservatives and maybe the Labour government don't want people to work. That needs to be the question. I would love a journalist. See, I have to ask these questions because journalists will not ask these questions. Why is it a problem for journalists in the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, any media outlet, GB News and Talk TV, forget about those. But why are journalists not asking Nigel Farage, why don't we allow these people to work? You're complaining about the cost. You're saying it's millions of pounds every day, billions per year. Well, then if you allow them to work, then there's no problem, is it? No, but unfortunately, we don't even get to the stage of him responding because the question is never asked. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what do you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.